Hello and welcome to week 2, module 2, where we're going to talk about lenses. I've got a bunch of lenses right here and we're going to talk all about the different lenses, how to read your lens, and the difference the lens makes in a picture. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We talked a lot about aperture, what aperture is. I showed you pictures of the aperture ring, and I put a animated GIF or GIF up in the bonuses so you can actually see it in action. But the aperture is inside the lens right here, and if you look into your lens, you can see it in there. And like I said in the last module, it opens and closes as you change the number on the back of your camera. And this just controls how much light comes into your lens. So it lets more light in, it lets less light in. Very simple. Now, when you see this number on your lens, for instance, on this particular lens that I'm looking at right here, I'm looking on the number and my number says 77 millimeters. And it's got that little circle with the slash through it right there. And I think on Nikon it just has the circle with the slash and then the number. It doesn't have the millimeter. But basically what that number is saying the diameter of the lens, so the distance around here. And so you can see I've got a smaller lens, so this has a different number. This number is, I believe this is a 52 millimeter diameter. So what that means is it takes different sized filters and lens caps. So if you were to lose your lens cap, which I lose my lens caps all the time, this little guy here, when you order a new one, you look at the lens and you look at the diameter, the size, so a 77 millimeter, not milliliter, and I go on Amazon and I put in 77 millimeter Canon lens cap, and that's how you order it. And you can also put filters and different things on here. So anything that is screwed onto the front of the lens, that's the number you use. Now we've got numbers, and it's going to vary on what lens you have. So let's take a look at the different lenses that I have here. So most of the lenses that come with your camera, they're the 18 to 55. This particular lens is a 24 to 105. This lens is a 16 to 35. This lens only has one number, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then this bad boy here is a 70 to 200. So what those different numbers mean and why they're important is the smaller number on your lens is how wide it shoots. So if you're whatever you're photographing, the widest amount that you're going to be able to get in the scene is that smaller number, and then when you zoom in, that second number is how far it's going to zoom in. So the bigger the number, so the 200 here will zoom in the furthest out of all the lens on my desk here. And then the 16 to 35 will zoom in the least. So 35 is the farthest it will go, 16 is the widest it will go. So my 16 to 35 is the widest, and then my 70 to 200 zooms in the most. So that's important because you're going to see in a minute that makes a big difference in what you're doing. Now, I just said one of my lenses has a single number. So this is a 50 millimeter. What does that mean? It means it goes wide to 50 and it zooms to 50. That's it. If you want to zoom in or out, we call it zoom with your feet. So you either walk closer or you back up, but it has one number. And this is a nifty 50. So I always recommend that you start with a nifty 50. Like this would be your first lens that I want you to buy that doesn't come with the camera. In fact, if you don't even get the lens that comes with the camera, get a nifty 50 because you'll really, really like that lens. So now the other number that we have here is the aperture. So in the case of the lens on the screen, you'll see it says 1:3.5-5.6G. So what that means is 3.5, remember we looked at all those apertures in the last slide? 3.5 is the lowest aperture, so the widest it will open up when it's at 18 millimeters. 5.6 is the lowest, or the widest that the aperture will open at 55 millimeters. When you have a wide scene, you can get all the way down to f3.5, that's the aperture, and when you zoom in, you can get to f5.6 at 55 millimeters. Both of them will go to f22 when you close it down. So that's a really important number. So as you get into more expensive lenses, you will have a fixed aperture lens. So in this case, you can see it says 16 to 35, and it only has one number, 2.8. So that means at 16, it will go all the way to 2.8, and at 35, it will go all the way to 2.8. So that's what we call a fixed aperture lens. It's the same aperture at its widest as it is as it's most zoomed in. And those lenses typically cost a little bit more, and they're a little higher quality. Not always, but typically. Now, looking further at these lenses, here you've got the AF/MF. What is that? Well, that's autofocus and manual focus. So 99.9% of the time I shoot in autofocus. That's where you press your button halfway down, it beeps, you can see the focus adjust, it takes the picture. That's huge. Back in the day, they had to do it manually all the time, so once your eyes went bad, your photos pretty much went bad. So thank goodness we live in today, or I would not be able to take pictures. Manual focus is if you're having trouble and the autofocus isn't focusing and you'd rather do it manually, you can stick it on manual focus, turn the ring, and you can focus it yourself as long as your eyes are good and you can see. So Sony in particular, I know because I have a Sony camera, the manual focus is not on the lens, it's actually in the camera settings. So if you go into the different settings in the camera, you actually choose manual focus and then you can turn the lens. For Nikon and Canon, it's just a little switch on the lens itself. So that's important to know. If you have a Sony, you're not going to see that on your lens. You've got to go look for that in your camera settings. So stabilizer on and off. This lens, no, not that lens. This lens and this lens both have image stabilization. And what is that? Image stabilization is something that is built into some lenses, not all lenses, that allows you to shoot at a lower shutter speed, and we're going to talk about this next week, but basically when you shoot at a lower shutter speed or you have a longer lens, here's a great way to picture this. Have you ever looked through binoculars? And when you're looking through the binoculars, everything's shaking around and it's hard to find the subject you're looking at. What image stabilization does, especially on the long lenses, which are similar to binoculars, is it allows you, it helps you mechanically keep the lens more still and less prone to handshake than without it. So it allows you to shoot at lower shutter speeds. It allows you to do more without getting blurry photos. So typically, not always, but typically higher end lenses come with image stabilization. But I see that they've been putting them on some of the entry level lenses as well. So this is usually a bonus. It's a nice thing to have if you have image stabilization. It means that it's a better lens, that you can shoot at lower shutter speeds, and you'll generally get better and more sharp pictures when you have image stabilization. Now note on Nikon, it's called VR, vibration reduction. All right, so image stabilization, vibration reduction, everybody might have their own little name, but that's essentially what it does. Now let's look at lens comparisons, because why would we have all of these lenses? What's the difference? Why don't we just have one lens and use it for everything? Well, the most obvious question, or the most obvious reason is, well, one, I want to zoom in. Say I'm a sports shooter, my kid's in soccer, and I want to zoom in across the field. Obviously, that's one reason. Or I'm a wildlife and I want to stay away from the wildlife, I want to zoom in. That's another reason. Or I'm a landscape photographer and I want to shoot really, really wide, so I need a wide angle lens. That's an obvious reason. Now here's maybe a not as obvious reason. Each lens has a particular look and feel. We talked about bokeh in our last module, and bokeh is that blurry background. And some lenses have, I guess, prettier or more appealing bokeh than others, or you may prefer one type of bokeh versus the other. And so each lens brings a different look and feel based on whether you're zoomed in or you're out wide. So it's one thing just to test them, try them out, see what you like. I know I definitely have a preference over what lenses I like, especially under certain shooting situations. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And if you're having a hard time seeing this, like if you're watching this on a phone or a device and it's not super easy to see, I also put this as a PDF download, and you can either download it and print it, or you can put it up, you can zoom it up on a big computer screen if you want to see this a little bit better. So what this is, if you look over on the left, I am using, so this is the top left and the bottom left are taken with the same lens. So it's taken with the, this is my 24-105, and it's in a fixed aperture lens. So it goes to f4 at 24 and it goes to f4 at 105. So I can zoom in or I can go wide. All right, so both of these pictures were taken with this lens, and you can see at 24, I'm focusing on the mum. It's giving me a lot of the surrounding background. You can see my background is not very blurry, and I'm shooting on a tripod. And I want to note too, I'm shooting on a tripod, so I am not moving. The only thing I'm doing is zooming in and zooming out, and I'm switching out the lenses right away. So I took these pictures, boom, boom, and boom. So they're all under the same conditions, the flowers didn't move, etc. So the only thing changing in this picture, the only variable, are the lenses. Now I have kept my settings exactly the same here, and I've zoomed into 105. So my camera settings did not change and my lens did not change between these two pictures. I just zoomed in. And you can see a huge difference between the backgrounds here. You can see you're getting some really nice bokeh in the bottom left picture. You can see kind of these little balls of light back here. And you're always going to get more background blur with a zoomed in shot, so a more telephoto lens, than you are with a wide angle lens. So that's one thing that sets apart these interchangeable lenses from an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy or whatever you're shooting with. All right, so let's jump over to the second from the left. Now these are actually taken with two different lenses. The top one is a 50mm 1.4 or 1.8, which I have in my hand. The bottom one is taken with an 85mm 1.8, which I'm actually using to shoot this video, so I can't show it to you. But you can see that one, they both have really pretty blurry backgrounds, but for me personally, I prefer the 85mm at the bottom. They're both shot wide open, so they're both shot at 1.8. So they're both at the same aperture. But I like the 85, I like the blur that it gives. If I had to choose between these two pictures, I like the one on the bottom, but you might like the one on the top. This is why you try out different lenses. They each have their own look and feel and your own preference as to what you prefer. So now I'm going to go over to the next one. So this is the second one from the right, and this was taken with my wide angle. So this is my 16-35. It goes to f2.8 at both the wide and the zoomed in. And you can see at 16 on the top, there's hardly any blur, even though I'm shooting at 2.8. So I'm shooting at 2.8 in both of these shots, so the second from the right and the one to the right. But look at the difference in the background blur. So I'm at 16mm wide here. I would say this particular picture here is the most, it's gonna most resemble an iPhone photo. It's wide, it doesn't get a lot of blur. It's got a little bit, but it's not nearly as much as the telephoto lenses. And here I have zoomed into 35 and I still don't have a lot of background blur. I have a little bit, it's not tack sharp, but it's definitely not as pronounced as say the 85. So compare the difference here. Now if I go all the way to the right, this one I'm using my long lens. So this is my 70 to 200 2.8 lens. So it goes to 2.8 at 70 and it goes to 2.8 at 200. And I am shooting with that. The first one I'm shooting at 70, so I'm out wide and you can see there's some nice blur. Not quite as much as the 85 over here, maybe a little bit more than the 50, tons more than at 16 and tons more than at 35. And then I zoom in close to 200 and here I'm completely isolating the mum. I'm getting tons of background blur. I can't even tell what I'm in front of. It's completely gotten rid of the background. And so you can see how each of these lenses has a different look and feel. So depending on what you're shooting, you will find the ideal lens. And the best way, or what I've always done, is I love to rent lenses before I buy them. In fact, I rented this lens so many times, I'm like, you know what, I better just buy it because I'm spending a lot of money on renting. But a lot of these lenses, the higher quality ones especially, they can get very pricey. Now some of these smaller, like the Nifty 50 and the 85 1.8, they can be less expensive, more affordable. But before you buy some of the more expensive lenses, it's really nice to rent them. And there, I put in the resources, I've got 3 places you can rent them. And then I've got a couple places, if you live in the Atlanta or Dallas area, you can pick it up and save yourself some shipping. So that's nice because the shipping can get expensive. But if you're going on a trip or you're going on, or you've got a special sporting event that you want to do, it's always nice to rent a lens and try it out, especially because they can be $1,500, $2,000. So if that's not something that you're interested in, but you do have a special event that you want to photograph, renting can be a very affordable option. Now let's talk about the Nifty 50. I talked about it for a minute and I just put the picture on the left because I took it with the 50mm, but it's a very versatile, inexpensive, fixed aperture lens. So this is a great one to learn with. It's got a much lower aperture than the lens that comes with the camera. So it's great for indoor classrooms. It's great for really anything indoor that doesn't have great lighting. It lets in a lot of light. And it's a great one to learn your camera with because you can get to those low apertures and try some of the things that I'm talking about. So in the resource section again, I've added a couple links to the Nifty 50 for Nikon and Canon, and then Sony also has one. It's not quite as cheap as the Nikon and Canon, but I have that for my Sony camera and it works really, really well. Most of the really inexpensive lenses work best in the bright daylight. Sometimes they struggle with focus when it gets low lit or a little darker out, but they're all great options because they're so affordable, you can't really go wrong. All right, so if you want a blurry background, the lens choice makes a huge difference. So the longer the lens, so for instance the 200, the 85, even the 105 end of these zooms, they're going to give you the best blur. Now the lens that comes with your camera, you can absolutely get blur. You just have to make sure all the elements come together. So you want to make sure it's zoomed into 55. You want to make sure you're standing pretty close to your subject. So as close as probably you can get and still focus. And you want to make sure that you've separated your subject from the background. That's really important. I've seen people in my class, when they practice, they put their subject right up against the wall or right up against whatever they're trying to shoot against, whether it's the Christmas tree, whether it's the woods. They put their subject right here and they don't see any blur. That's because you need to separate your subject from the background to get blur. Otherwise you won't see it. The other thing you need to do is make sure that, say this is my subject, all right? Say that this is my background over here. So I've got nice separation, but I also want to make sure I'm not too far away from my subject. So if I'm way over here, I'm still not going to get as much blur. I want to be close to my subject, either physically close with my body, or I want to zoom in close So I don't necessarily have to be standing right in their face, but I want to be zoomed into their face, okay? So I'm going to zoom in on my subject. My subject's pulled away, and I will get very nice background blur. And you can do that with the lens that comes with your camera as long as you're in the right position. So just to recap, the right position means that your subject is pulled away from the background and you, the photographer, are fairly close, either physically or zoomed in with your lens to your subject. And you can print out a little cheat sheet and put it in your camera bag. I've made a diagram, how to get lens blur, or how to get background blur, and how not to get background blur. And you can fold that up and put it in your camera, so if you're sitting there trying and you can't remember, you can just pull that out and use that as a little diagram until it becomes second nature. And the more you practice, it will become second nature, I promise. But at first, it takes a lot of thought, so it can be frustrating, so I want to give you something that you can reference while you're out there doing it. So that is the end of Module 2, and I hope that you will try, if your camera came with more than one lens, I hope that you'll try them out. The assignment is going to have you try out all the lenses you have, and it's going to have you try it out wide, it's going to have you try it zoomed in, because I want you to see for yourself the difference a lens makes. Lenses are the most, they're awesome. I love different lenses because your pictures truly look different with every lens that you use. And so once you learn what you prefer, this is gonna take your photography, it's gonna come right up, because even if you're just using the lens that came with your camera, if you know how to use it and you know what you're looking for, your pictures are going to be immediately better. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I can't wait to see your pictures and see what you come up with. All right, thanks.